Hello and welcome to A Critical Dragon, where I talk about narrative in film, television, and in books. And today, very brief update to catch up. And then I want to talk about an audiobook series that I've been listening to. It's a space opera series that I have really been enjoying. But I want to talk about it more in not only what it does that works so well with audio, but also what this series has going for it in terms of playing with some of the concepts that the author uses and why I am so impressed with it and why I've been enjoying it so much. But firstly, the update. Yes, as you can see, no ponytail. I haven't been as active on the channel recently because I was on holiday, and I was on holiday in Florida. For those of you who've never been to Florida, it is very hot, but unlike Texas, where at least it's a dry heat, Florida is a bit humid, and my ponytail turned into a squirrel tail. While this was intensely amusing for everyone around me as my hair went, it was incredibly frustrating. So I had to lose a bit of weight, and it came off the top of my head. But while I was there, I had the really good fortune to meet up with Jimmy Nuts from the Fantasy Network and my erstwhile nemesis, Philip Chase. And it was an absolute pleasure and a blast to hang out with the two of them for a few days at the International Conference for the Fantastic and the Arts, which I'll talk about in a second. But while we were there, we also got to meet up with Joanna and Alan from the Library of Alexandria. And that was enormous fun. It was so brilliant to be able to meet up with these people, to hang out, to talk, to chat. And it's slightly bizarre in that this was the first time I had physically met a lot of these people, including Philip, who, you know, I have must be over 100 hours worth of discussions with by now. But this was the first time that we physically met up, and I of course was shocked at how short Philip was, but he's going to kill me for that. But anyway, it was an absolutely brilliant trip, and I was at the International Conference for the Fantastic and the Arts, which is the conference held annually by the International Association of the Fantastic and the Arts. And this is an academic conference, so it's not a fan convention. It's an academic conference where academics present research papers. But this conference is very much focused on science fiction, fantasy, and horror in literature, film, television, computer games, and all sorts of media formats. So it is a very broad church of media, but at the same time, a very strong focus on science fiction, fantasy, and horror. And it is an absolute joy to go to every year, and it always fires up my interest and intrigue and engagement with some of these brilliant aspects of narrative. And the other thing that is so special about this conference for me is the chance to hang out with authors, because there's usually quite a strong contingent of new authors as well as well-established authors. And of course, I met up with Stephen Erickson. I also got to chat with Stephen Donaldson, the author of the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, and my friend Brian, who you saw on the channel as well, Brian Dietrich. He's a poet and an author. I got to hang out with so many of my friends who I've made over all these years of studying and talking about narrative. So that is why it's such a wonderful experience. And bringing in like Philip and Jimmy as new voices as part of this was a lot of fun. And it was great to get those new perspectives, to have some of the old stories told again, because Jimmy and Philip hadn't heard them. But at the same time, it just was adding to the conversation. And that's so much of what I want to do with this channel. It's add to conversations, never shut them down. So the other thing to mention is over 4,000 subscribers now. So thank you very much. This is incredible. I never thought there'd be 4,000 people interested in my inane ramblings about narrative. But thank you so much for subscribing. I really appreciate it. And I am looking forward to more conversations in the future, more collaborations with my fellow YouTubers, as well as hopefully some of the academics that I convinced to maybe appear on the channel to have discussions about their fields of interest and their specialisms. So that's all to look forward to in the future. And I hope that I can get some of that organized very soon. But the other thing that I wanted to talk about today, because I suppose I could have done this as two separate videos, but double dip, get everything out at once. I wanted to talk about an audiobook series that I've been listening to. And one of the reasons why I have been listening to this, and I'm about 4.5 books into the series, and you can tell, like, I'm 4.5 books in, I'm really enjoying the series. But one of the reasons why I was listening to this as audiobook is I was traveling and I was in different airports, and sometimes big, heavy fantasy books are just not convenient to tote around. And also when you're sitting on a plane, you can kind of close your eyes and listen to the audiobook. And so for me, traveling is a great excuse for me to listen to audiobooks. The other reason is I've been having migraines, and migraines make it very difficult for me to read, that I need to have my eyes closed, I need to be in a dark room, and it's very difficult to read in a dark room. On the other hand, listening to an audiobook, I can do with the lights off. So a friend had recommended this series, and it's the Expeditionary Force series by Craig Alanson, and it is narrated by R.C. Bray. And I don't know if the later books were published by a traditional publisher. I think the early books were self-published. But this is a series that I am greatly enjoying listening to. It is so entertaining. It's space opera with strong elements of humor, and it is really engaging and enthralling. So I wanted to talk about elements of this audiobook that I think work incredibly well, maybe suggest a couple of reasons why they work so well in audio format, and also contrast it a little bit with why I'm actually carrying on listening to this series instead of reading the text. And let's start with, it's going to seem like a mean comment, but when I was first recommended this series, I had a look at the preview of the text on a popular book purchasing website. It allowed you to look inside the cover to have a look at the first few pages. And after glancing at the pages, I realized this was not a book that I wanted to read physically. And the reason for that was the style of narrative is very informal. There are lots of sentence fragments, run-on sentences. The attitude to punctuation, at least in the first couple of books, appears to be slightly idiosyncratic. And the use of commas instead of full stops, the formatting of paragraphs, the appearance of it is not necessarily what you expect in a published work, that it doesn't sort of fit the standard formatting of a novel. Now, in saying all of that, that has nothing to do with the quality of the writing, and it is very much just to do with the presentation of it. But I knew in trying to read a physical copy, I would stumble and stop and start all the time, because I'd be itching to put in a full stop and move commas around and rearrange sentence fragments. And that is very frustrating, because it's not what the author intended. It's not how you're meant to read it. But I know myself as a reader, and it would drive me insane. And it would deprive me of the joy of actually reading this book. So that is one of the reasons why I went with the audio option. Plus, obviously, traveling and migraines. It worked perfectly. So why do I think this works so well as an audio series? And I have to say, I have genuinely enjoyed listening to this. It has been a lot of fun, and that's why I'm carrying on with the rest of the series, just while I'm doing other things. And the first thing is, the premise of this is very much a single narrator telling you a story, recounting the events. So there is a very strong narrative voice, a singular narrative voice. And because of that, having an audiobook narrator matches the narrative style. Having a singular voice narrating it matches with the narrative style. And because of that, it works seamlessly. The informal construction of sentences, the run-on sentences, all of these things that in written exposition would be snagging my eye sound so natural, because it's a lot about how we speak. We do not speak generally in formal English. We speak in a very informal English, and that's what's being reflected on the page. And in fact, there's only one mispronunciation I think I have caught the audio narrator doing, and that was lives instead of lives, or lives instead of lives. It was the different pronunciation that the written word has. But in saying that, R.C. Bray is the audio narrator, and he does an amazing job. Like, I really like what they are doing, and has a very distinctive voice for the central character, for the main character, and also for the central sort of other protagonist. And I don't want to spoil it for anyone, because I think it's a great series, and people who like to listen to audiobooks, I think you'll genuinely enjoy this. But in order to avoid spoilers, all I'm going to say is the information that you would get on the blurb, that this is basically from the back, where the central character is a human soldier. Earth got invaded by aliens, and this soldier, through circumstances in the first novel, ends up teamed up with an AI from an ancient alien race. So it is incredibly sophisticated, elevated, far beyond our technological level. It is a super intelligent alien AI that is incredibly sarcastic and very snarky. And this is one of the absolute joys of this series, the back and forth between these characters of essentially your average Joe and the super intelligent AI. Think Baldric and Blackadder, or Jeeves and Wooster. That dynamic pairing where one is meant to be very intelligent, the other is meant to be not so intelligent. Of course, the play here is we are of the same intelligence levels as the dumb one, and there is a super snarky, very intelligent, pop culture quoting and quipping AI. And it is an absolute joy to listen to, because it adds so much humor to the series. Plus, as the series goes on, they develop a genuine and deep friendship. And because of that, the antagonism between them feels very much like that sort of the poking we do to our own friends, that we have such deep friendships that from an outside perspective, someone might say, you are so mean to that person. And yet it is part and parcel of how we disguise how much we love them, is that we disguise it in that sort of being slightly mean to them kind of way, that there is that antagonism, but it comes genuinely from deep affection and love. And that comes across so clearly, not only in the narrative, but also the audio narration by Bray. So this series is very much space opera, near future, but one of the big things about this is because of that dialogue between the human and the AI, because it is advanced technology, there's never a need for the forcing of the two characters into the same physical space, because advanced technology allows for that back and forth, that dialogue to occur at almost any moment. And because of that, we don't have this situation where, you know, someone should be on their own, but the authors had to include a second character so there can be a conversation take place. That doesn't happen here, because it is built into the technology of the story that the AI can speak to the main character at almost any moment, and the main character can speak back. So dialogue between the two is always an option. The other thing that occurs is, because this involves, I suppose, futuristic technology, and we all know that sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, to quote Clark, that the futuristic technology, particularly in a lot of space opera, sometimes backs the author into a corner, because if it is easy to hand wave with futuristic technology a solution, it reduces tension in the narrative. But one of the great things about this is the author is very aware of previous solutions. And while it kind of is a little artificial and a little bit of a contrivance, because the author then refers back to the previous things, the AI invents an excuse for why it will not work in these circumstances. So every new circumstance has to have a new solution. They can't simply repeat what they did before. And these excuses, these reasons, these rationales all fit with the world building and the sort of the ever expanding knowledge and construction of the story world, this futuristic universe. So it actually adds to the world building that the reason it happened in book one this way, we can't repeat that because X circumstance is not present. Well, we didn't know that. It's, well, of course not. The super intelligent AI knew that. They knew the circumstances and then explain it to us. So this is another function of this balance between this dialogue, in that the advanced AI delivers a lot of exposition in effort to educate the dumb human, i.e. us. And it is a wonderful way to work in bald exposition into the story so that we, the reader, can follow along. And it is done with humor because it is a condescending alien AI being snarky about the fact that we are dumb. And it's actually quite funny. So it, again, is this wonderful technique that Craig Alanson has employed that allows him to dump a lot of expositionary information into dialogue, and it fits very naturally with the dynamic created. And this is, you know, the good way of doing what a lot of people call info dumps, that this is an excellent way to do it because not only is it blended with the humor and snarkiness of the AI, it fits with the dynamic and the differential in intelligence, it fits with the story world, and everything sort of comes together. So it is a wonderful mechanism that Alanson has created so that exposition can just be dumped to the reader. This also works well with another technique that he uses for the series that if I were reading the physical copy, I might have an issue with, but because I'm listening to it and occasionally get distracted, it works very well in audiobook format. And that is the repetition and rephrasing and synopsis of information that occurs repeatedly throughout the books. And it's not that it is continuously repetitive, but rather at judicious moments, Alanson summarizes or gives a synopsis of the things that are going on, usually because one character is explaining something to another. Quite often it's the AI re-explaining something to one of the humans, or it's the human re-explaining something because they're trying to wrap their head around it. And because of that, important information is never lost. Even if you lose focus for a few minutes, or in my case, an entire chapter, that information comes up again and you can still follow along. So it is a technique that works, I think, much better in audiobook format than it ever would in a written text, because in a written version, I would find it repetitive and laborious. But here, because it's delivered in character, because it's delivered in dialogue, or because it's delivered with snarkiness or humor or exasperation, because of all of those things, it makes it interesting to listen to, even though the information is something I have heard before, maybe even multiple times before in that book or the previous book. So it's something that works well because of the dramatization by the audiobook narrator, R.C. Bray, that wouldn't necessarily work as well in a written text. So I'm actually, while at times it is slightly redundant and repetitive, it still fits with the narrative, and it fits with when we're having a conversation that sometimes we reiterate things that we have already said. So even then, it fits with the construction of the narrative and what the narrative is actually doing. One of the other things that I really enjoyed about this is space opera quite often has a problem whereby heroes acquire advanced technology. And we see this actually in fantasy as well, where heroes acquire an advanced form of magic. And from that point on, it seems, well, why would anything be a problem? Because it is so easy to solve this with your advanced technology. And you would think with the heroes in this, with their advanced alien AI, that it would run into this problem. But as I mentioned previously, each problem that arises, they have to come up with a new solution because the author wants to keep things imaginative and to do different things, but also it would become very repetitive if the same solution happened every time. And one of the things about this is the ship that they are riding around on is actually, 5 minutes away from falling apart. It's a bit of a junker. And it is very tempting. And we've seen this in other series, Gene Roddenberry's Andromeda, which was a TV adaptation based on some of Gene Roddenberry's notes sort of during his Star Trek writing. In that, they had an advanced ship. And if you have a very advanced ship that is militaristic and very powerful, it's so easy that every solution will be just blow them out of the sky. But here we have very inventive solutions because while the ship has certain capabilities and they are helped by a very powerful AI, they can't just fly in and blow everyone up. They have to be clever about it. And that cleverness is a limitation, is in response to a limitation on the technology. And previously, I've said that regardless of whether magic in a series is hard magic or soft magic, is a defined system, or if it's far more nebulous, that as long as there are limitations that are known to the author, that you can't just hand wave everything, that as long as there are limitations, you can create tension. And that is the thing that Alanson does so well, because they don't have a giant, unbeatable, invincible ship that can just blow people out of the sky. They have to be inventive. And because they're inventive, that creates tension in the story, tension within the narrative, and allows for inventiveness and new things and new developments and new or different problems to arise that then have to be solved. So it is a wonderful technique that Alanson has employed within the narrative. Added to this, and of course, one of the things that we love reading about and hearing about is that this is an underdog story, the perennially understaffed forces of good facing off against an overwhelming force in opposition. In this case, like all of the different aliens in the galaxy. And because of that, we constantly have that rooting for the underdog, and we feel the tension that they feel because the stakes are so high. They have to be so careful about what they're doing, and one misstep could lead to absolute disaster. So it is another way that the author has really built a lot of tension into the narrative. And of course, because this is being narrated by one of the characters, it has that very personal feel. So a lot of this combines the limitation on the technology, even though it is advanced, the fact that new solutions have to be created each time, the fact that it is kind of folksy and personal because you're being told this story, and because it's an underdog story where you want to root for the poor humans in this situation. All of those things lend themselves to a story well told. So it is really enjoyable to listen to. And that's not even talking about how well R.C. Bray actually narrates the story and how his voice seems to so well fit the character of Joe. So this was just me talking a little bit about Expeditionary Force, and I think the first book is Columbus Day. I'm greatly enjoying listening to this. It is a lot of fun. And if you like funny space opera, if you like that sort of quippy dialogue between snarky people who are affectionately sniping at one another, and if you like underdog stories set in space, it is kind of militaristic, but on a much smaller scale. And I think it works very well. I've been greatly enjoying it. And it has been fantastic to listen to while I was traveling, so much so that I'm going to carry on when I have an opportunity to listen to it at home, in between like reading other books. So thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your continued support. Thank you for, getting this channel up to over 4,000 subscribers. Thank you so much. I will see you in the next one.